Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe.
Good morning, everyone. Great to have you all with us. My name is Chris Jensen, Mayor of America's hometown of Noblesville, Indiana. Edition of Mental Health Monday, a program my good friend Kristen Boyce, who's with us this morning. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jensen.
And now we're kind of diving into topical conversations. And today is one of those, which we're excited to have some special guests. We are joined by Courtney and Betsy of St. Gianna's, who are going to tell us a little bit about St. Gianna's in a little bit. But before we do any of that and talk about the mission here at hand, we're going to get started as we always do on Mental Health Monday, and that is by some square breathing to kind of center ourselves. This is probably the best advice Kristen Boyce gave me 6 years ago. It's cheap, it's easy, and it's a great way to center yourself. So Kristen, you want to lead us through a exercise of that before we get to our special guests?
Absolutely. So anybody that feels overwhelmed today, stressed, maybe you're anxious about what's coming up in your life or just what's going on in your life, it's overwhelming. This is the first step I teach clients to center their nervous system. So we want to get into the parasympathetic state where that's rest and digest. It's the calm state in our nervous system. So we're going to place our feet on the floor, and that helps ground you into the present moment. We're going to inhale through our nose. We're going to inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then slowly release out our mouths for 8 seconds. And that deep inhale is what you want to focus on. So we're going to feet on the floor, kind of get comfortable, either if you're standing or sitting. Big deep inhale through your nose. We're going to do it together. We're holding, and then slow release out your mouth. When I was doing a presentation for first responders, I looked out in the audience and I said, if your shoulders haven't moved, we're not getting that big, deep breath. So we want to make sure we're really getting that benefit of that full inhale. So let's do it again through our nose, big, deep inhale. And release out our mouths. I recommend if you need more breaths, do 5, 6, 7 breaths, and then really connect to your nervous system and your body. And notice the difference between when you first started and then after.
I love it. You can almost feel like an instant release too and a relaxation. I love that feeling. I do it. I always talk. Thank you for that advice. Hey, before we get started, I want to remind folks, thanks for tuning in. Courtney and Betsy, we have people all over the world actually who tune in, which is so much fun. And a lot of live watchers, but a lot of people who go back, thousands actually every week that go back and watch the show, which is so great. I'm so excited. I got to meet Betsy and Courtney. Well, I've known Courtney for a long time, actually, full disclosure. Got to know Betsy recently. They came in and met with my better half, Julie Jensen, and I tried to get Julie Jensen to join us today. She had a conflict, unfortunately, because we're going to talk about some very, very topical conversations. They came in to meet with us to talk about the work that St. Gianna's is doing. And boy, it spoke like directly to our heart in the Jensen household. We talked a lot about working moms. We talked a lot about mom guilt, all the things that, quite frankly, a lot of young families, and even, quite frankly, older families, it doesn't matter age range, that are dealing with every single day. We talk in the government space a lot about workforce reentry, moms back in the workforce. What are those barriers? And that's exactly the work that these guys are doing every single day. So with that, Courtney and Betsy, I'll let you guys kind of introduce yourselves and kind of the work that you guys are doing. And then I want to dive in with Kristen. And I know Kristen has first world experience. Not only is she a working mom, but counsels a lot of working moms every day on this topic. So Courtney, I'll punt to you first if you want to kind of tee us up who you are and what you guys are working at, and Betsy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Courtney Hott. I am on the board of directors for St. Gianna's Families. My day job is I'm the government affairs director for the Indiana Association of Civil Engineering Companies. I have a background in counseling and mental health, actually. Was a practicing school counselor for about 5 years, and then really enjoyed the impact I could have on state level public policy and systems work. And so Over the last 15 years of my career, I've spent a lot of time working on structures to support mental health in Indiana. I'm also a working mom of two. I have two little girls. They are 4 and 5 years old. And so this is all still very fresh for me. And yeah, I met Betsy through another connection. And full disclosure, we had a cocktail together and just sobbed because of the connection that working moms have to each other and the feelings that it brings up to really let it out and talk about it. And we just knew we had to work together. So yeah, that's me. I'll punt it over to Betsy.
Great. Thanks. So I'm Betsy Phillips, and full disclosure, I am not a therapist. I don't have a degree. I feel like I should. I have been in banking for over 20 years. I'm a mom of twins that are now 17. So a little out of kind of the childcare phase, but I started St. Gianna's about a year and a half ago after talking with a lot of kind of my working friends. And we all had one thing in common. And that one thing was the most difficult time in our lives was when our kids were young. They were in childcare and we were juggling all the things from mom duties, childcare, financial burden, a career, barriers to reentry, and then the mom guilt all wrapped up into one. And so we got to a point and I said, I want to do something, even if it's just helping one mom at a time or bringing awareness. And that's how St. Gianna's family started. Just that thought a year and a half ago is that I want to help moms when they were in the space that I was in. I want to give them a hand up. And so here we are today.
That's awesome. Can you tell a little bit, either one of you, kind of about what the services you guys provide, what that looks like?
Yeah, so it's twofold. I mean, it is one, lessening the financial burden for a mother. So it's directly assisting with the cost of childcare and that rising cost. And then the second pillar is bringing awareness to the high cost of childcare and what a mom's going through and paying, and just bringing awareness to the workplace of what a mom brings to the workplace, right? And a little bit of compassion to the workplace and being seen. One of our recipients for this summer, when we told her she had won the grant, she was elated and overjoyed and crying. And I'll never forget, she said, I've never been given anything in my life. And we know that she was excited because of her financial burden was going to be a little less this summer. But we also know from an emotional standpoint, she was probably seen the very first time as a working mother that she had never been seen like before. And so it's two pillars. One, it's awareness, and one, it's financial assistance.
Well, I want to kind of dive into both of those, because even if you grant somebody the dollars to have that childcare opportunity, I know Betsy has some signal issues here. We hear her great, which is great. She'll be back with us shortly. But not only is it the financial burden, but even when you go back to work, and Courtney, you know this firsthand, then the back end of that, the guilt around that is a real thing. Mom guilt is a real thing. Full disclosure, I'm not a mom. I'm a dad. We see it very differently. And again, Julie Jensen and I debate this a lot at the Jensen household. So with that, I'm going to kind of punt it to you, Kristen Boyce, to kind of talk a little bit about what you just heard and what you are seeing in that professional space right now around that mom guilt conversation, and how females and moms view things differently, or viewing it differently.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction between guilt, in that saying we feel like we're making a hard choice, and shame. Shame says, I'm a bad mom. And I feel like that's a really important distinction to make, because it can quickly turn from guilt, like I feel bad, I'm going to work, I'm leaving my kid, I feel like I'm missing out on milestones and events, and yet I feel torn because I have a purpose and meaning in my job, or it's a necessity that I work. Two things can be true. Both can be true. Shame says I'm a bad mom. What I see in my office often turns from guilt to shame. Like, because I'm working, I'm a bad mom. And that takes us down what we call the shame spiral. We feel depressed, we feel anxious, it feels about us as a person versus our choice. And I often am working with that part, both guilt and shame in my office. I think it's really important to say, well, how do we work through guilt and shame? Because that's really where the rubber meets the road. And what we know through research is compassion and nurturing that part. And it's really hard because we have an inner critic that says all the things we're doing wrong as a mom or as a wife or as a partner or as a friend. We constantly have that inner critic voice in our heads. And often we have hormonal issues, especially after a baby. We can have postpartum depression. We can have brain fog. We can have serious depression and major anxiety. So we're looking at all those components all at once. But the antidote to shame is empathy and self-compassion. And that's something that's a skill almost to be taught because we are so critical of ourselves. I mean, we really are so incredibly critical. And we work on how do we be tender with that inner critic? How do we befriend that inner critic? How do we reparent ourselves while we're trying to be a parent to our own children? So there's some parts from our past that we might need to heal and tend to so we can get to the other side and really access more compassion in our lives.
Courtney, you want to touch on a little bit about, you have a lot of personal stories around this. You talked about having 2 young girls. You've been open about some of the challenges that you faced with workforce reentry. Can you walk us through a little bit about your story? And then obviously, Kristen, I'd love you to chime in a little bit about some of the things that Courtney has done to better that experience for her and her family.
Yeah, I'd love to. So something you said, Kristen, that really was pivotal in my journey to finding more wellness as a working mom is that 2 things can be true at the same time. That's something that I worked on with my therapist constantly through postpartum because it all felt like all or nothing. It felt like I was either failing at being a mom or I was failing at work or I was failing at being a wife. Like there was no food in the house or we didn't have the next size up in clothes. Like there was just this massive mental load that I felt like before I had children, I was able to be really like detail oriented. And then all of a sudden we had these 2 babies in 18 months and I just completely fell apart. I couldn't function. With the first baby, looking back now, once I got help after the second baby, we looked at, there was a lot of postpartum OCD, a lot of intrusive thoughts, a lot of like, what if I am actually a bad mom? What if I hurt my baby? What if I do all of these things? None of those things I wanted to do, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was exhausting trying to do all of that while also manage those thoughts. And this is coming from someone that has a background in mental health. I didn't realize what I was going through because I was having so many other things in my life of like trying to heal and trying to nurse a baby or formula a baby. Like finding those feeding struggles is like so stressful the first time. And then we had the second baby. Like I said, they were only 18 months apart. So our youngest was 9 months. We found out we were having another one. And I was kind of scared, to be honest. I was like, it was a twofold. It was, I'm really scared because I don't feel like I'm in a good place right now, but also I kind of want to get all of this over with and have 2 young ones and just get out of this. So it was almost like a instinctual, like, okay, I just want to get this done. And then with the second baby, I had such a different postpartum experience. I was very sad. I just kind of didn't want anybody to touch the baby. So it was like I went from one extreme to like the other. And so that was like a massive swing for me. And that's when my husband would laugh that I would tell this story. I'll never forget, there was this moment. She was just a couple of weeks old and I went to go take a shower by myself and I just sobbed. And I was like, loved sobbing in the shower. I was like, great place to sob. Nobody can hear me. Incorrect. My husband and his mom could hear me on the other side of the wall. And my husband came in and he's like, hey, you good? And I was like, no. And that was kind of like when I realized that like, hey, something's not right here. And I actually was lucky enough to take an extra month off from my job to kind of work through some of that and like stay home with my baby a little bit longer. Because I was also having that like back and forth of like, I love to work. I want to work. I went to school for a long time to work is so important to me. But also I felt like I should stay home. I should be doing that. And I had external forces in my life too that were really telling me like, oh, well, you should be staying home. That's where it's most important that you are. And that was really hard coming from people that I cared about, but also learning how to set those boundaries and be like, you know what, you might feel that way, but I enjoy working and it's a big part of my life and I can do both things. And so working through all that with my therapist was really helpful and I feel like I'm finally getting to the other side of it. Maybe even after 4 or 5 years, it's been a journey. And the cost of childcare, which is something that Betsy and I focus on a lot, is also wild to me because I work in public policy and we had both of our children in childcare. And we were paying over almost or right above $3,000 a month to put our children in childcare. And had I stayed working as a public school counselor, I would have been paying money to go to work. Mm-hmm. The math wasn't mathing. And so that was also like a harsh reality for me of, oh, wow, this is also like a privilege that I can pay for childcare. And so this just spoke to me through so many different levels. I could talk about it all day.
Kristen, there's a lot to chew on there. I know you want to probably comment on several of those things.
Well, the first thing I think, Courtney, that you shared that has a lot of shame for people is the intrusive thoughts and OCD type thoughts and feelings and the fear, like lots of fear.
Yeah, people
More,
assume OCD
yes,
is cleanliness, right?
like checking door handles or
So checking light
yeah,
switches.
and hand washing. They don't realize that intrusive thoughts is a symptom of OCD. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's a lot of people don't speak about that and the fear of hurting your child or that intrusive
Yes.
thought coming through. Can you share more about that? And then how do you work through that?
Yes, sure. So I never knew about that side of OCD. And it became really extreme during that first postpartum experience. And then now I realize too, like even as a child, I had symptoms of that type of OCD. Basically, the compulsion and the thoughts are all wrapped up in one. So you are your own trigger, you are your own anxiety source, but you can't break this cycle. And so I love a name it to tame it. That is always like a staple for me when trying to work through something. And I found that saying it out loud didn't mean it was going to happen. Being able to share those thoughts that, like, oh, I had that thought. I can have thoughts go through my brain. They don't necessarily have to mean anything. I don't have to give value to them. And so, like, for example, if I was like walking down the stairs, I would maybe have a thought of what if I trip and fall and I hurt my baby? Or what if I threw my baby? I also am a big true crime fan. So, like, I'm giving my baby a bath and I'm all of a sudden my brain's like, oh, remember that mom who drowned all of her kids in the bathtub? But what if you did that? And it's like, I didn't want to do any of that, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so when I worked with my therapist through a therapist, medication, all of those things, like trying to use all the tools in my toolbox, I realized that like I can have those thoughts and it doesn't have to be a value add to my life. And so another thing we did was kind of put it outside of other thoughts in my life that I have that don't necessarily have that impact on me. And so finding ways to not necessarily cognitive behavior therapy, because that almost like would spiral me even more because then I would get into a rhythm of like trying to talk myself out of it. And then I would get into a loop. So it was more just about like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge this. I'm going to kind of poke a hole in it and be like, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And then kind of let it go through. And that takes a lot of practice, like years of practice. And yeah, does that answer your question? Like that's
Yeah.
kind of how I worked through it with my therapist. And that's really what worked for me, was taking the value away from those thoughts.
I think that's so important that we're talking about this because when people struggle with that, they feel like, what's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. I'm the only
Yes.
one that feels like this. I'm really not okay. Like, I'm not right. And what I want to say is that those can be very normal thoughts to have come up, and no one's saying that. Cry because you just went through so much to care for children or your child. And I want to say that early intervention is really helpful. So there's a lot of free therapy out there for graduate school programs. Indiana Wesleyan has one, CTS has one. So if you're thinking about, well, where can I get support? Where can I get therapy? Support groups are great. Also, therapy is great at the very beginning. And if you're making a transition back into the workforce, that is really helpful to have support, a support system. I can't emphasize that enough because we try to do things all by ourselves. We don't ask for help because we feel like we shouldn't. The shoulds are shame. Anytime you have a should, you're in shame because it's like, I should be able to do this. I shouldn't feel this way. Everybody else looks like they can do it. And what's wrong with me that I can't? And I think that's really important. That's where your organization comes into play. Like asking for help and resources is really crucial, especially when you're making a transition to motherhood, parenthood, and back into the workforce.
I will say something that helped me tremendously was finding, like using social media, because I was also a COVID mom. So my babies were 2020 and 2022. So I was pretty much home alone all the time. And so I did end up kind of revamping my social media, and I unfollowed these like mom influencers, like where I was just like, giving me this idea of what my life should be, that should shame, and really started connecting with therapists, have a great social media following that introduced me to other people that were following her. And so now I have this really great like online community of moms where we send each other reels, about, and there's so much more of that now, I think, since COVID, of like the realities of motherhood. And so I think that that's one good thing that social media has brought out of it, is that there is a whole nother algorithm of like all of us moms that are just trying to do our best. And so it feels a little bit less like you're achieving that perfection.
Yeah, Kristen and I talk a lot about social media and the good and the bad, right? To your point, Courtney, like there is a network there that you can lean on and learn from, but there's also an unrealistic network that is setting expectations that are just not achievable and not real. I would say my Facebook profile is the best I've ever looked in years, right? So let's just be very honest about that. And so I think you have to manage that a little bit. Betsy, I want you to chime in. I know we're having some issues with your video, but I think your audio's there. Talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing in terms of trends in the daycare conversation and the workforce conversation around professional women.
So what's really cool about St. Gianna's families is we focus on a really specific subset of women in Indiana, kind of how, and in most states, to be honest, how things are set up. Really low income moms have access to childcare vouchers. And we've all seen all the drama around that, right, over the last few years in Indiana and trying to figure out where that looks like budget wise and wait list, et cetera. And so that group has that support through the state. Some local organizations have scholarships for low income moms. And then, your higher income moms, it's easier to write the check. It's not easier to be a working mom. It's not none of that. It's just easier to write the check. So we've really focused in on kind of this idea of moms who are approaching leadership roles who don't have support elsewhere financially to stay in the workforce. So for example, when I was a school counselor, or so many of my teacher friends left the workforce because it just wasn't worth it. So I had $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year roughly is what you're looking at cost wise. If you think about your bring home, you have to be making upwards of $50,000, $60,000 a year to really make it worth it, especially if your spouse has healthcare or things like that. So many times moms take a step back and then they are not at the table, right, to make these decisions. They're not sitting there with leadership or in emerging leadership roles to say, hey, have you thought about how this impacts mothers? And this is how we get to a place of organizations that have leadership that don't understand what it's like to not have a spouse at home taking care of all of your children, or to not necessarily think about the impacts or just day-to-day things like pumping, for example. I remember pumping at my cube at one point because I just didn't have access to resources. And at that point, I'm sitting there, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I here? And so our goal is to really focus in on that subset of women that are in emerging leadership roles. We're trying to encourage them to stick with it. And if we can do that right now through a grant to help ease the financial burden for a month, that's great. We've had a lot of talks about what this looks like of building a community around all of us working moms and finding a way to positively bring people together to mentor or just be not alone. That's kind of our unique specialty, is that, and those moms can kind of get left behind sometimes, right? And so that's kind of where we focus. And so it's been an incredible journey to read through all of these applications of moms who are finishing master's degrees, finishing degrees. They're pushing to try to make their career better. And this just helps them kind of get over that hump of being able to do that. Because we also, so many of us have kids in mid-career, and the mom tax is real. I mean, it's real. You take at least 6 weeks off, hopefully, right? Hopefully we get at least 6 weeks, and that's not always the case. And it's a lot. And you're having to, I know for me, coming back into work was where do I fit here anymore? Because everything goes on without you, which is good. You want to keep the ball rolling, but it's also kind of lonely to come back and be like, oh, they did this all without me. Kind of takes the value away. And so kind of fighting in some ways to get to feel relevant again, but also having all these thoughts in the back of your head about what my baby's doing at home. And so we really want to be able to at home or at daycare, in my case, be able to keep pushing them and be like, you can do this.
Well, I think you guys are approaching it from two. It's not just a financial assistance. It truly is a resource assistance and a coaching assistance that you guys are focused on. Kristen, I want to flip over to you and let you spend a few moments here talking a little bit about what kind of some high level advice for those reentry moms, first time moms, existing moms in the workforce that are facing that mom guilt, kind of some tools that you can equip them with from a professional counseling side.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because we could go deep into this subject. I think
we may have to do this again at some point in time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot here.
There's a lot, because there's a lot of loneliness, and what Courtney was saying, I mean, there's a lot of loneliness. So first is giving yourself permission to ask for help. Okay. Because that's a hard one for especially the moms that are high achievers or perfectionists or trying to do it. I can do this, get it all together. We want to look.
I have goosebumps when you said that.
Yeah. We want to look like we have it all together. So it's ooh, that's vulnerable. It's a vulnerability to ask for help. And that's the first we start working on is, okay, let's look at your support system. Well, let's see where we can plug in resources and assistance, because otherwise you feel like you're going to crumble. It's just too much. And you feel like you're not doing anything well. So it just feels like the world starts to kind of get smaller. So we work on the vulnerability of asking for help. Do you know that for women, that is like one of the biggest vulnerabilities that they have? Most people don't know that. And for men in particular too. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter gendered. Asking for help is vulnerable. We know that through research. And when we're down, our bodies are saying, I can't do it. Like, I just can't do it all. So we work through that. We work through self-compassion. Again, we're working on how do we offer ourselves kindness and nurturing during this time. And we may need some additional assistance, like a therapist, a medication. And I'm not a big medication pusher, but at some point, sometimes the hormones and the neurotransmitters need a reset. So we get a consultation for that just to see, hey, is this something that would be beneficial? Because if you feel at the point where the OCDs or the intrusive thoughts are taking over, or depression, where you just feel like your self-care goes down, so you're not showering, you're not really taking care of yourself, you feel really at your low point, then we work on that as well. And then listen to podcasts and books and resources that help normalize what you're going through, because you feel so much shame, like there's so much wrong with you and you're not normal. And when you start hearing other people talk about this journey, you start feeling less alone. And it actually starts shifting a little bit of your thinking to feel like there's something wrong with you. And then the fifth thing is the and in both. I'm a big fan of the and in both. Like, two things can be true, but we really were grown up with right, wrong, good, bad, all or nothing. So it's really a skill set we start to work on, that two things can be true. And we can hold both of those at the same time and offer both those parts of us that feel torn or feel scared, that those two can coexist. And once we start working on those things, we start seeing a shift in the nervous system, because we're really working on nervous system. And the last thing I want to offer is bilateral music. I am a big fan. You know, I brought this up last time. You put your headphones in and it's almost like you're kind of being rocked, if you will. You have sounds that go in your right ear, your left ear. And if you're typing, you're doing laundry, you're taking a walk, put the bilateral music on for 5 minutes. You can get it free on YouTube. You can get it on iTunes, Spotify. It's available anywhere. And if you do it daily, I'm telling you, your nervous system starts to reset. We've got to work with the nervous system in the body, not just because the cognition, your thinking can't override what your body is telling you. So we have to understand that sometimes our thoughts, like, we can't out intellectualize this.
Yes.
You have to work with the nervous system, and bilateral music is a great option that's free, that I highly recommend to all my clients.
Awesome. Well, it's amazing how quickly a half an hour goes with this conversation, because we could go on for a long, long time. Courtney, I really appreciate you as a person and as a professional, and your willingness to be vulnerable today. That is the key to this conversation. Betsy's amazing. Unfortunately, we lost her for some bad internet connection, but we'll get her back in this conversation. I want to thank both of you for letting me ride along with this conversation. I just want to be very clear. I am not an expert in this space. I understand there's something to be said about a dad sitting here narrating this conversation, but I just wanted to give the forum for you guys to continue talking about this. And Courtney, a website where folks can learn about St. Gianna's Families.
Yes, and we can probably link it at stgiannasfamilies.com, GIANNAS. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. So look us up, find us, ask for help. Moms, apply. There's no shame in applying. Please ask for help. I'm also on Instagram, Courtney_Hott. So feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have coffee with another working mom and just connect. So this was incredible. Thank you so much for having us.
It's our honor, truly. And we'll put the link in the comments there too. And we'll keep you guys engaged in this conversation. Kristen Boyce, you're always amazing. Pathways to Healing Counseling is where people can find you. If you're a working mom or anyone right now in a crisis and feels like the world's caving in on you, where do they turn, Kristen?
988, 24/7 trained clinicians on the other line. I am a big, big fan of 988 because it's free and it's available anytime, anywhere, text or call. Please, you're worth it. You matter. You're important. You're loved, even though shame wants to tell you a different story. And it's available anytime. So please never hesitate to reach out to 988.
It's awesome. And Courtney, I see our friend Amy Curtis just chimed in saying thank you. We know her well, and also a working mom out trying to do the work every day. But thank you both. And we'll see folks back here next month for another edition of Mental Health Monday.
Thank you, Courtney, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney.
And sharing. You're helping a lot of people. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button
to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, D, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.